Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the show. My name is Tim Nash. Tonight, I am presenting some research that I've done over the years, but that I've updated for the year 2025 called the Green Transition Scoreboard. So this research has a little bit of history. I've been doing this since like 2009. So I'll give you a little bit of that history tonight. But before I kind of give you the history and the context and any of that stuff, let's just jump right into the meat of it because I've got the headline right here that really it is incredible when I add up investments in the global green economy that we now have over $20 trillion invested in the global green economy since 2015. So this is basically, I started, we had the Paris Accord in 2015. I've counted every single year up to last year. So this kind of starts with at the end of the year, 2024. And I got, okay, it's like a hair under 20 trillion. I was kind of like trying to get it a little bit higher, see if I could just find a few extra dollars here and there, but that's okay. I'm happy with the result. We're at $19.87 trillion invested in green sectors over the last 10 years. So to me, this is absolutely incredible. I'm going to put a little bit of context into this, but for now, really just don't want to bury the lead that having $20 trillion since 2015 is just remarkable. That I titled this webinar, The Unstoppable Green Economy, because, the thesis for a long time is that there's a green transition happening, that it is accelerating, that government action can kind of speed it up or slow it down, but there's no real stopping it, that it is going to happen due to physics in terms of climate, limits to climate change and the greenhouse gases and kind of what we can safely emit, that I hope that those are going to be some boundaries, but also just due to sheer economics, that as green technologies become more profitable, we're kind of in this virtuous cycle that now that we've kind of kickstarted the green economy, there was a time where they relied heavily on subsidies and government support, but now we don't need this. It's really taken off on its own. And this is a virtuous cycle that, as the green economy grows, it's going to become more profitable. That's going to mean more money is going to flow into green sectors, which means there's just going to be continued growth there. We can talk about whether it's happening fast enough to avoid worst case climate catastrophes. Certainly welcome to have that conversation. But really my job here is to provide sort of this hopeful, inspiring story that the green economy is way bigger than people realize and help you dig into the numbers to be able to understand how I came to this figure and kind of what it means for things ahead. So, just to kind of break down the pie chart, I'm going to round it up to $20 trillion. We've got about 42.5% of it does come from renewable energy and smart grid. So I'll get into that. I'll get into each of these sections with a little bit more detail, but it is still, the biggest chunk of it is going to be renewable energy. From there, green buildings is a massive part of it, about 17% of it. Transportation, so this is going to be electrified mobility, so electric cars and e-bikes and electric trains and all that fun stuff at about 14%. Water has been very stable. I'll show you that sector at about 14%. And then I do have this kind of this new category for me with this research, which is in the past, we kind of looked at commitments. And so when companies would make commitments saying, hey, we're going to spend however many billions of dollars on electric cars or renewable energy, but we've kind of learned to not trust corporate commitments anymore. So many companies have been walking those back. So I kind of don't trust those numbers anymore. So now what we're doing is we are looking at the green bond market, or in this case, it'll be the sustainable bond market. And that is going to be at about 12.5% of the total amount of this $20 trillion. And I'm going to dive into each of these. So really excited to be able to show you this. What I can do is just sort of show you the chart of the growth over the last 10 years. So for people that end up listening on the podcast, I will try to sort of verbalize it as best I can, but that really, back in 2015, 10 years ago, this is when the Paris Accord was signed, we had about a trillion, even some of the numbers sort of like round down, to almost zero, just because it was about $1 trillion invested in green sectors. But then we've just seen tremendous growth. This is the aggregate. So you can see year by year, they're just, this number is going to grow, but also that it is accelerating. We're kind of hitting that sort of hockey level, stick level of growth, such that, now here we are in 2024, that the annual amount for this is a hair under $4 trillion. And again, this is split up between energy, buildings, transportation, water, and bonds. And it's the unspent portion of bonds. I'll explain the methodology with bonds in a little bit, but when companies raise money, they issue bonds, they are going to spend it. So to try to avoid double counting, I'm kind of trying to only look at the unspent portion of those sustainable bonds. So really incredible growth. It's hard to put in context, like $20 trillion. What the heck is $20 trillion? What is that? So, just to put a little bit of context for you, I used to have this question when we did this report, and it was sort of, what is $1 trillion? It's a number that's so big that we can't really fathom it. The best way I've come to communicate it is, in terms of understanding the sort of the number of seconds. So, if you think of 1,000,000 seconds is about 11.6 days. Okay. So if you did counted up to 1,000,000, it would take you about 11 and a half days. To count to 1 billion, right, which is 1,000 million, that would take you 31 years. 31 years to count to 1 billion. To count to 1 trillion, it would take you 31,700 years. That 1 trillion is 1,000,000 million. And it's really hard for me to kind of communicate just how much that is. But I got to tell you, it's a massive number. It's 13 figures. Like, it's a 1 with 12 zeros after it. This is a very, very large number, is 1 trillion. And so the fact that there are $20 trillion invested over the course of 10 years, the fact that there's $4 trillion in green, flowing into green sectors last year in 2024 alone is just, it's a remarkable number. Now, as an economist, we don't look at it necessarily the same way. We're like, oh, it's just an extra zero. We just moved the decimal place. Yeah, of course, 1 trillion, but that really it is, it's hard for me to communicate that exactly. I will do my best over the course of tonight as we kind of break things down, to give you a better sense of what that means and relative to maybe things like fossil fuels or other sectors. But for now, I need you to know, 1,000,000 seconds, 11 and a half days. 1 billion seconds, 31.7 years. 1 trillion seconds, 31,700 years. It really is remarkable. So before I get into each of the sectors, let me give you a little bit of the history, the backstory. This is the report that we did for, oh my goodness, how many years? Started in 2009. So I did this a research project with a mentor of mine, a woman named Hazel Henderson. Shout out to Hazel. I'll put this link in the chat and we'll put it in the show notes. Hazel was just such an incredible influence on my life. I cannot sort of overstate that. But Hazel is just was such a remarkable human. I met her in 2007. I was doing my master's degree in Sweden in sustainability. I went to a conference in Brussels called Beyond GDP, this idea of moving past GDP as a measure of economic growth. And I met Hazel there, and we just had the best conversation. I asked her to be an advisor on my master's thesis. She said yes, and was a huge help there. And then a few months after graduation, I graduated straight into the 2008 crash. So, there was no jobs for me whatsoever. Hazel sent me a message and said, hey, I've got this idea for a research report. Do you want to help me with this? She was just so ahead of her time and such a visionary. So we started this journey of doing these annual, and sometimes we did like 2 of them a year, reports called the Green Transition Scoreboard. So this is the website. I'll put it in here. I kind of had to dig this up to see where all of the old reports were, but you can go back and actually look at them and read them. If you look at some of the early ones, like December 2009, it was really just my research. You can see my rough sort of, Excel spreadsheets, but we got up to $1.2 trillion. And that was 2007, 2008, 2009. So over 3 years, 1.2 trillion. And that was remarkable. The fact that we were able to count over $1 trillion was just incredible at that time. From there, what we started to do is Hazel would write some reports. So, if I skip ahead to sort of 2013, let's say, you can read the report. And that she, this was a little update, but she would do these reports. She would write about this, just absolutely amazing insights. Yeah, Carol's in the chat right now, one of Hazel Henderson trustees living in North Carolina. So honored, Carol, that you're joining. And really, the people I met through Hazel were just the coolest people ever. But that, yeah, like you could go through these and all the way up until the most recent one. The last one we did was 2019. Really, the thesis way back in 2009 was that if we could hit 10 trillion by 2020, that we would kickstart the green transition. This idea of sort of an unstoppable green economy, that's what we needed was 10 trillion. And so in 2019, you can see this report, we topped $10 trillion, right? I counted past 10 trillion. This was incredible achievement that, we looked at it from, cumulative since 2009. Right. And so we hit 10 trillion. We thought, okay, great, fantastic. We don't have to worry about this more. If you remember, back in sort of, 2019 into 2020, people were starting to take climate change seriously. There was a big boom happening. Right. And then, of course, COVID happened. And, really my business, I got so busy with my business. Hazel sadly passed away, which was a tremendous loss. But we didn't do the research anymore. We didn't think we had to. But really, over the last year or two, I'm sure y'all have noticed that there has been a little bit of a backlash against anything green, against anything that's ESG, against anything that's sort of sustainable. These arguments that I had so often back in, 2010 that, the green economy, it's too small and it's too silly and it's shrinking and it relies on subsidies and all those things have now come back into the public consciousness. And so I decided to do this research again. Wanted to bring back this perspective to the forefront, carry on Hazel's brilliant notion that by counting these numbers and showing business leaders and politicians just how big the green economy is, that's going to encourage more action in these areas. So that's kind of the why behind this report. I guess the last thing I'll just say is that I do have a kid coming. Right? Like I have my daughter is going to be here in the next month or so. So to me, it was a really personal thing that from my last live webinar before going sort of on pat leave and welcoming her into the world, just wanted to kind of have this little gift of this number, this little sort of mind bomb, just seed this $20 trillion figure out into the internet to be able to let people know that the green economy is unstoppable. It's here and it's growing. And that as much as I know that so many of us feel this sense of dread that maybe it's not growing fast enough, I'm here to tell you that it just might be, that it might be growing fast enough to be able to get us out of this mess. So we're going to spend a little time digging into the why and why I'm actually hopeful right now. So let me get back to my presentation here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by looking at energy. Now, what I'll say is that, I do have all my sources down here. So I'm going to share this as a PDF. I'll put it up on my website. You're going to get a link to it tomorrow, and we'll put it in the show notes. But what I can do is click on it at any point, and it's going to take you to my source. Hazel was always so big on footnotes. I can't tell you how meticulous she was with footnotes. So it's like, I better cite my sources here. So when it comes to renewable energy, I'm using the IEA, the International Energy Agency's World Energy Investment 2024 report. Right? That's what we've got linked here. What this is showing us is that we have seen tremendous growth when it comes to renewable energy. There's going to be renewable energy plus smart grid. Okay, so I'm combining those figures. You can see, in 2015, it was at about $662 billion, still huge, still massive, right? But that, oh my, it's grown. And it's grown, basically every year. We're starting to see a real acceleration since 2021. 2021, it was up to $800 billion, then $972 billion. 2023, it cracked the $1 trillion mark and hit 1.15 trillion. And last year, 2024, I'm happy to report $1.225 trillion globally invested in renewable energy and smart grids. This is huge. This is massive. We'll see what the 2025 figure is. Maybe it'll slow down a little bit. Like we'll see if, the current environments are such that it does slow down, but I don't think it will. I don't think, anything that happens, especially with US policy, is really going to knock it down. A huge part of this number is from China. About 40, I think 42, 44% of the figure is from China. So it really, doesn't really matter who's president right now. They're going to continue to invest in renewable energy and smart grids, and the rest of the world is going to as well. So when it comes to renewable energy, this is absolutely huge. This is absolutely massive. To put these numbers in context a little bit, that hopefully you can see my Excel spreadsheet. And for those listening along, I want to show you that, basically we've got these figures for power for renewables. So to be clear, our definition does not include nuclear. We can talk about that, but that was a no-no for Hazel. It does not include carbon capture sequestration. It does not include any form of biofuels. Okay, we don't count those. Hazel was very, very clear about that. So this is going to be renewables, and then plus storage and electricity networks is kind of how I'm getting my figures. But when we look at just renewables, and this is 2023. So it's a year old, but I'll just show you this, that it 659 billion invested in renewables, right? Which is higher than the amount invested in oil, which was 529, way higher than the amount invested in natural gas at 276, and certainly like a multiple times higher than coal at 148 billion. So I want to be clear here that renewables are absolutely beating fossil fuels. Those are when it comes to fossil fuel development. When it comes to energy production, the numbers are much lower for fossil fuels. And nuclear, I mean, how much talk have I heard about nuclear? Right? Everyone's saying, oh, we need more nuclear. This is like sort of the smart person's solution to climate change right now is nuclear. In 2023, it was 63 billion, only 63 billion. A tenth of the 659 billion invested in renewables in 2023. The 2024 figures are similar to this. It's like renewables is like 10 times bigger than nuclear. So to me, it's just really, really exciting to see these figures, to be able to show just how gosh darn big the renewable energy economy is. And, really putting that into perspective that, when we do hear, especially in North America right now, a lot about natural gas and LNG and the global market for that, we hear a lot about, sort of like, oh, fossil fuels aren't going away anytime soon, right? Well, I'm here to remind you that really renewable energies are way bigger than that. Okay, so let's go back to my presentation now. But that's kind of when it comes to energy, really, really excited to see these wonderful figures, that there is just so much invested in renewable energy and smart grids. Is it enough? Like, no, we need it to be about 3 times bigger to avoid climate change catastrophe. But it used to be we needed it 4 times bigger. So it's getting better. It's getting better. I'm not going to promise it's getting us all the way there, but it is getting better. Okay, when it comes to green buildings, this to me, this is one of my favorite sectors. I love green buildings. I'm just such a believer. They have better air quality, right? More efficiency, using things like sunlight to be able to have heat. I love green buildings. 10 years ago, it was at about $175 billion per year. We've had tremendous growth, again, especially since 2020. It's really taken off. Like it did grow to 281 billion in 2020. But then it surged forward to 403 billion in 2021, 461 billion in 2022, over $500 billion, 504 billion in 2023. And then last year, it was at $551 billion into green buildings last year. So to me, this is, again, it's one of these things. Pretty soon, basically, all buildings are going to be energy efficient. Like, why wouldn't you? Right? To be clear, this is going to be green construction materials, is the data that I'm using for this, as well as electrified heat. So when it comes to that, it really is going to be interesting to see, how much that grows in terms of us using things like heat pumps to be able to heat our buildings. That's definitely a big growing sector. I don't have a country breakdown for this one, unfortunately. If I show you the link, these research reports, it's just such a funny thing, but I have to use these sort of press releases so I can see if maybe they have sort of segmentation here. by region? I don't think so. I would have to buy the reports, and these reports often run in the sort of like thousands of dollars. So I'm not going to get the whole report. I wish I could tell you where the global breakdown for this, but unfortunately, that is a limitation of my data for buildings. When it comes to transportation, this is the one that is just growing absolutely the fastest. I am completely blown away by the growth in electrified transport over the last 10 years. That back in 2015, we had $38 billion, right? So 38 billion. And then it has just surged. Again, really, 123 billion in 2019, but then 172 billion in 2020. And COVID is really when the numbers took off on all of these sectors, but especially electrified transportation. Because in 2021, it jumped from 172 billion to 308 billion, up to 462 billion, up to 629 billion. And last year was $760 billion, $750 billion last year was spent on electrified transportation. This is overwhelmingly electric cars. Again, I don't have a regional breakdown for this. I wish I did, but it's just not super clear to me. But I know China is absolutely a leader when it comes to electric vehicles and manufacturing them. That this is going to be overwhelmingly electric cars. This does include e-bikes. So in certain countries, e-bike segments are huge and growing. This does include things like electric trains, although again, it's just not, I don't think it's going to be nearly to the same degree as electric vehicles. Tammy says that interesting, some of our charging stations are starting to disappear in the north. And, this to me again, just like boneheaded moves by our governments, because it was back in, when was it? Sort of 2019, I remember, I think Doug Ford got elected here in Ontario and started ripping out charging stations. And this is an absolutely massive growth since then, that really like now here we are competing, trying to get electric car manufacturers to be able to, to build them. So, Doug is saying not in BC. I'm happy to hear that BC Hydro is building them out. Absolutely that makes me so happy that other jurisdictions are kind of pushing on this more. Will be really interesting to see. But again, there's this weird, in the media, there's this weird notion that EVs sales have been lackluster or disappointing. We had a big plant delay production here in Honda. They were going to build a big manufacturing plant, kind of got blamed on low EV demand. Obviously, it's a tariff situation. Like, I don't know what the company said. Obviously, it has to do with tariffs. I can understand why people, this notion of a cross-border car supply chain feels a little tenuous right now. But, to say that somehow, demand in electric vehicles is declining, maybe it's not growing as fast as we thought it was, but when it grows 20% in a year, right, it's hard to imagine growth faster than that. So, absolutely, massive investments in electrified transport when we look at this globally, that it went from, out of my different sections, it went from being the smallest to now it's, I think it's second behind energy now for 2024. So, just really incredible to see the growth of electric cars here. Sue says we have to remember that in North America, we live in a big oil pushback bubble. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is moving forward, and no question. And Sue, this is like part of what I'm trying to communicate here, right? Is that, these narratives start to take control over us. There's a big push, propaganda by fossil fuel lobbying groups, to be able to convince us, oh, oil's not going away anytime soon. Well, okay, but we're certainly not going to need more of it in the future. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how this transition continues to grow and evolve. Water has been one of the most stable sectors. I love looking at water. To me, this was one of the first things that when I looked at numbers, and if you look up sort of like how much was invested in green sectors in 2024, you're often going to get this figure of 2 trillion, whereas my figure is like 4 trillion. The reason I'm higher is because of buildings, but it's also because of water. And even 10 years ago, like people weren't considering water to be part of the green economy, which to me is a little bit bananas. We know the water energy nexus. We know that when it comes to climate change, we're going to need so much more water infrastructure. Some places have too much water. Some places have too little water, right? That it really is clear that, oh my goodness, we absolutely need more water infrastructure going on. The last number here for 2024, so I'll just go through it. It started in 246 billion in 2015, and then fairly stable, like 260 billion, 274 billion. It actually came down a little bit, 260 billion in 2018, 246 billion in 2019, and then it surged up 263 billion in 2020, 282 in 2021, 302 in that's 2022, 323 in 2023, and then let me get that number. It's just a little cut off here by my webcam. 346 billion in 2024. So, again, I don't have the regional breakdown when it comes to these water figures. I wish I did. Again, this is a really awkward, it's this Fortune Business Insights water and wastewater treatment market. So, they want to charge me thousands and thousands of dollars for these research reports. I'd love to partner with maybe like an academic institution that maybe could, convince them to give them that industry report for free. But, when it comes to water, it really, truly is a global thing. And that, although water hasn't surged, like it hasn't seen the growth that a lot of the other green sectors have over the last 5 years, it has been very, very consistent since the beginning. It was about $250 billion there. Now it's about $1/3 trillion 10 years later, and has just been incredibly consistent. So really, really interesting when it comes to water. From there, the last section that I had. So we used to do for the Green Transition Scoreboard, I would count commitments, and really, I don't trust corporate commitments anymore. That I've seen too many companies make these big announcements about we're going to invest however many billion in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. And as far as I'm concerned, just too much of it is BS. I don't trust it anymore. So, but I do like having a little bit of a forward-looking aspect to this. It was really fun for me when I did that research report for so many years, looking at the mega projects that were being built, looking at the big, the big commitments and the big swings that companies were taking, when it came to green investments. So I did want to have some aspect of forward-looking data. So the way I did it is Climate Bonds Initiative. I did have a wonderful webinar last time about green bonds. I don't know if anyone participated in that one, but had a great time chatting with the bond manager of Alpha Fix about the green bond market and how much it's grown. So, I was really inspired by that and decided to look at it. I am including what are called sustainability bonds. So these are going to be green bonds plus social bonds plus sustainability bonds. Okay, which are kind of a combination of green plus social. So this is kind of the broadest definition, but I'm not including in this something called sustainability linked bonds. If you want to know the difference, you can listen to that webinar, go back on my YouTube channel and find that one, or, it might even be the previous episode on the podcast, because, we did have a great conversation being able to break down sort of this whole market and all those different terms. Now, because I'm worried about double counting when a company or government issues a green bond, they're using that for green projects, but they are going to be spending it, right? So it will get spent at some point. So basically what I did is I assumed that like anything 2020 or before that, that's been spent, that I can't count that any money raised back then has already been allocated. It's in one of my other categories. But then, basically you're not going to have spent any of the money raised last year. So I am counting $1.1 trillion in sustainability bonds that were issued in 2024. That were raised in 2024. So that's $1.1 trillion got raised through the sustainability bond market. And I'm assuming that didn't get spent in 2024, right? Just because the turnaround time on that. And then I'm assuming that 75% of bonds issued in 2023 is unspent, that companies, governments would have spent a quarter of it. And then 2022, so, 2 years ago, that it was 50% of that got spent. 2021, that 75% of it was spent and only 25% of it is unspent. And then, like I said, I'm not counting a single dollar from bonds raised 2020 or previous. So, that said, the green bond market is just incredible. It started at 55 billion back 10 years ago in 2015. So the Paris Accord gets signed, only 55 billion of sustainability bonds gets issued. right? And then up to 95 billion the next year, up to 190 billion the next year. So it almost like doubled and then doubled again. And then 232 billion in 2018, 384 billion in 2019. Huge surge, again, almost a doubling up to $752 billion raised in 2020. So $750 billion, right? From there, it went over $1 trillion in 2021, right? Then it did dip down in 2022. If you remember, interest rates came up, right? So interest rates came up, and then so less bonds were issued in 2022 and 2023, but now we are back up to a new record of 1.1 trillion issued of sustainability bonds in 2024. So really, 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 really interesting stuff here. I believe Carney has committed to transition bonds too. We'll be interested to see how this rolls out. Issuing Canada's first ever transition bond in 2027, scaling to $10 billion per year. These financial instruments will help high emissions industries raise capital to fund their shift towards a low carbon economy. So, Michael, great comment there. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Mark Carney leverages this bond market. He understands it very well. So I expect Canada to be a bigger player here. Absolutely. And there is a difference between a transition bond, which is helping high intensity, high emission industries, things like steel, right, be able to transition. There is an argument around carbon capture and sequestration, right, helping the oil industry decarbonize, right? So we'll see whether that gets included in the taxonomy and whether that's part of it. But there is a difference between transition bonds versus sort of like green bonds or sustainability bonds. My understanding is that this doesn't include transition bonds, although I might have to dig into the data a little bit more to differentiate there. But it's going to be really, really interesting to see, sort of how this grows. No question, I expect Canada to be a big player in the sustainability bond market. But it's also clear that the US is going to go backwards on this, right? So when we look at the 2025 figures, it wouldn't surprise me if things are a little bit lower. Don't expect anything coming from the US federal government, certainly. And that, I think there might be a little bit of a chilling effect felt in this bond market in the US. But I think the rest of the world is going to keep moving forward with this. So, it'll be really, really interesting to see what this does in the next year or two. Awesome. From there, I do want to give a few little shout outs to some people that helped me on this before I kind of go back to the initial slide and kind of wrap up. I really want to thank my co-authors over the years. Hazel Henderson, oh my goodness, Hazel, I miss you so much. But also, I know she's with me. I hear her voice sometimes and I feel her presence with me. I know she would be watching this and be so happy that we are keeping this going. Rosalinda was an incredible co-author throughout those early years, and Lorraine, who stepped in and did the impossible of capturing Hazel's brilliant ideas and putting them down on paper and kind of making my data a little bit more readable. Also want to give a huge thanks to Mark Weiss, who really contacted me a couple years ago when Hazel passed and said, Tim, we got to get this back. We tried kind of bringing it back a couple of years ago. I had some help from Mariana and Yasmin to really kind of bring it back to life. And then, it did take me a couple more years to be able to get it to this point. Nick Bucheri, who helped me out on the design from some of these slides and the charts, helping me use Canva. So we're going to publish this as a PDF, so you'll be able to hover over and see the data, which to me is really cool, being able to present the data in that way. Calvin and Sonia were so instrumental with this research. They kind of double checked my data for me and just kind of went through and double checked things and were able to help me clarify. I was off by a couple billion here or there, some small little rounding errors, and they were really helpful in helping me to clarify things and make sure that these numbers are absolutely accurate. So really that's it for my presentation. To me, it do want to end off with just reminding people that the green economy is unstoppable, and it's way bigger than people realize. And so whenever you hear someone talking about, oh, we need to build a new pipeline in LNG or, nuclear, oh my goodness, we need to, invest more in nuclear. I want you to remind them how gosh darn big the green economy is. And if you like investing in nuclear, you should love investing in renewables, which are 10 times larger, let alone in green buildings, let alone in water infrastructure, which we so desperately need, right? And then electrified transport is absolutely growing, counter to some of the narratives out there. And then, the question is going to be, well, Tim, how do we pay for it? This is great, but the green transition, oh, we're worried about climate change. How are we going to pay for it? Well, sustainability bonds, 1.1 trillion issued last year. We can absolutely see that grow in the market. There's more to have there. So, just really want to leave you hopefully with this spark of inspiration that I know for so many of us working on climate change issues, is that it really is dicey, when it comes to this, that it feels like, we're losing the battle somehow. Louise is saying that, may I conclude that it seems like China overall is a major player, but 56 of energy and transportation. So absolutely, China is like kind of kicking everyone's butt on this. They've known it for the last 10 years. And so while we're moving backwards, presumably, potentially in North America, in the US, I think we might be in a little bit better shape here in Canada with our prime minister. But the rest of the world's moving forward. And it's not even like I used to say, like, skate to where the puck is headed. It's like the puck is there. Like, we can start taking some shots on goal here. Like, we want a piece of this $4 trillion annual global market. So that really now absolutely is the time to have continued investments in green sectors. It's more than just renewable energy. Renewable energy is a big chunk of it, but it's more than that. It's also green buildings. It's also electrified transport. It's also water. And then if the question is going to be, well, how the heck do we pay for it all? I really want you to understand the green bond and the sustainability bond market, because that is just absolutely massive and growing. But let's leave it there. What I will say is that this is going to be my last webinar and sort of my last show before I go off for summer break to be able to welcome my daughter into the world. I would love for y'all to be able to follow along. I am going to be releasing episodes on my YouTube channel and as podcast episodes. So I am recording some amazing interviews with some amazing folks. So I would really encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, throw it up there. I would just absolutely love it if you subscribe to my podcast. If you go to my website, there's a little podcast button in the top right. You can subscribe on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, whatever you use. I would just be so, so happy if you subscribe there. I would really, really appreciate it. But otherwise, really want to encourage people through the summer. I'm not going to be available very much via email, so would love for people to join my classroom. This is the space that I built to be able to help people on their sustainable investment journey, and that this is going to be where I'm going to be spending most of my time this summer. But if you do want to get a hold of me directly and have questions about your personal investments, want to take steps on your sustainable investment journey this summer, then absolutely find me in the classroom. I'll be posting there. You can send me DMs there if you want to get a hold of me or have specific questions, but would love to see you in my classroom. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much. I'm so, so grateful that for you to spend some time with me, and we'll catch you at the next episode.